Shakespeare, or Sir Francis Bacon, whomever, once said that all the world's a stage, and all the men and women merely players. They have their exits and their entrances. And this applies very well to the world that propaganda has created for us in the modern world. And that's why I think it's important to talk about. I mentioned some stuff on propaganda in a video I put out yesterday, and I sort of talked about how you're primed for a problem, reaction, solution sort of scenario. But what I really wanted to focus on here was how propaganda actually forms the mental prison that you live in. Because that is the most important function of propaganda today, and really all throughout history, is to dictate how you think and to neutralize your ability to exercise your will in a world where there are controllers who want to exercise their will over you. So before we just jump into this, follow me at Twitter, Rumble, Odyssey, and Locals. I get banned quite a bit on YouTube, so if you're watching this here on YouTube, then I could be gone at any moment. It happens a lot. All right, so I wanted to talk a little bit about basically how your worldview is formed and how it's accomplished. So it's sort of this order out of chaos alchemy that is used by propagandists, whatever you want to call them, behavioral psychologists, sociologists. And what they want to do is to destroy your old, more robust, resilient, independent, and reliable outlook on the world. And they want to replace it with something that's easier for them to manage, where they can very easily just send you in one direction or another. So the first part of this is to destroy your old worldview. And there's a lot of really obvious sort of things they do to, create a sort of unmoored population where you have no direction, you have no moral compass, you have no instinct to tell you up from down. And I want to go over a few of these because I think that it's important that we speak about specifics if this sort of information is to be useful. So how do they destroy your old sources of wisdom, your old worldview, your old outlook on the nature of reality? One, through destruction of religion. So religion, whatever you think of organized religion or whatever, it has a lot of wisdom in it. It's sort of the primary purpose. Whatever you get out of religion, one of the things is it's generations after generations for thousands of years coming up with a collective wisdom which they pass down. And it gives you an allegiance to something other than these controllers, generally speaking. There might be exceptions for that, say like in Hinduism, where there's a caste system. But certainly in Abrahamic religions, there's a focus on your individual soul and your individual ability to control your own destiny. They get rid of sources of folk wisdom. So, they sort of poo-poo the idea of common sense, like like old wives' tales or whatever. They basically make anything that's not out of a university laboratory seem like pseudoscience and superstition. That's something they like to do. And you can see a lot of this also in children's entertainment. So if you have kids, like one of the few things I like my kids watching is DuckTales. And the old DuckTales, now they made a new one, but it has a lot of just the classical stories from like ancient Greece or, the stories that we learned as part of a classical education growing up. Whereas everything new is basically just mindless brain candy, as I tell my kids. So they want to get rid of that wisdom that you get through culture. And that, sort of ties into the next bullet here, which I'm talking about is classical and philosophical education. They don't want you to have the wisdom of reason, of critical thinking, of the sort of Socratic method. They don't want you to have the old education, the mythology of ancient Greece or just ancient cultures, because there's wisdom in all these things. And as you study it and you understand the purpose of those stories and philosophies, you're able to think better for yourself and you have an understanding of some universal truth. They don't want that. They want to change truth for you all the time, as you'll see, or as I'm sure you have seen. Also, the understanding of metaphysics and natural law. This is a big one. There's just fundamental laws of nature that are universally true. And the controllers of this world, especially in Western civilization, go to enormous lengths to divorce you from that from that understanding. Whether it's the idea that, all things are gendered, the idea that if you have to concentrate and focus on something if you want that thing to happen, cause and effect, very basic things that everybody knows. These are things that are basically buried and glossed over and sort of perverted by the culture we have today, which has been intentionally created. And I mentioned acknowledgement of gender there. And then another big one for destroying your old worldview is atomizing the population, so isolating you from others, so that you don't have anybody else you can bounce your thoughts out against that could sort of, give their opinion to synthesize your thinking into something that's more coherent with reality. And that those people also might command your loyalty and give you a network, which would threaten, any government power structure, because that itself is a network. They don't want competing networks. So how do they do this? And this is huge. And I think that people need to sort of face these things head on. Even if you have fallen for some of these traps, it doesn't mean you always have to. I think we all have fallen into some of these traps that isolate you. It's just part of our society today. But big parts of this are divorce. They don't want you with your wife and your kids if you have kids. Those are competing for your loyalty, of course, and they're really, you have loyalty to them before anything else. That is the key component of any tribe. The same applies to kids. Nursing homes for old people. I mean, they want you to throw your parents into somebody else's care. They don't want you, tied to them, keeping them alive, loyal to them, responsible to them, having, a desire not to disappoint them because you just ran off on whatever dumb shit the government's telling you. Remote work. This is a big one, and I've noticed it enormously. I'm a consultant, so I used to go to clients and I'd sit in a team room with people when I was on a project, and we would talk. And, if you're sitting in a room with a bunch of people all day, you end up discussing all sorts of things, and it sort of molds your thinking, it refines your thinking, and you have just a better sense of reality from different angles than you do if you're completely isolated in your apartment, not talking to anybody, not going out or whatever. And I see how this works a lot, and just how poorly people's thinking is formed these days in a professional environment. People don't think of things because they don't bounce it off of other people because they're isolated. High job turnover. You're not working with the same people every day, even if you are in person. So you stay at a job for a few years. I mean, I'm guilty of this too. You go on somewhere else for, a pay bump and a signing bonus or whatever, and you lose some of the deeper connections you've made with your coworkers. Geographic transience for your career. Again, this is something I've fallen into. You move away from people who you have close relationships with because, hey, there's a job that's in this city, or it's a promotion in this city, or whatever. Or you don't see people as much, including your family, if you travel for work, because, it's just too easy, just move you around. And then solitary entertainment, things like that you just passively watch, where you're not engaging with other people, like, Netflix, or just, video games you're playing by yourself, Sudoku on your phone. I'm addicted to that shit. I delete it and then re-download it constantly. It's a habit I would like to kill. And then cheapening of social relationships through social media. So if you get a lot of your social interaction, because people do need social interaction regardless of whatever sort of, circumstances they put you in. If you get it through social media, you're not forming deep connections to these people. And, that includes work relationships too. You're not really developing friends out of your colleagues, or strong networks if you're doing all Teams or Zoom meetings or whatever. And you're not developing strong friendships if all your friends are on Instagram and Twitter or whatever the fuck people use. I'm not really that much into social media. And then there's sort of the debasement of the church. I mean, they've turned the church, especially in Christianity, they've turned the church into this just shallow husk of a thing. There's no deep meaning that you get out of it. You might go there to socialize or something, but really, in reality, it's just, attendance to something as shallow as the sort of Protestant churches that people go to today. You're not going to go, and you're not going to meet the people that you would otherwise meet there and develop the relationships and bounce your thinking off of people. So these are things that they use, and this is obviously not exhaustive. I'm sure you can think of plenty of other tactics they have to that they use to sort of isolate you and break down your worldview into something that's now malleable. All right, so once they have broken you down into a just absolutely untethered, drifting, meaningless piece of sand, they have to put you into a new mental prison. So here comes the straitjacket. So how do you do that? Well, one, you introduce a vision of a degenerate culture. You introduce degenerate culture. You give an idea of a lifestyle that doesn't lead to good life choices. It leads to self destruction. And I put in here Bollywood as an example because I think this is pretty striking. India had a very conservative culture for obviously thousands of years, and then with the introduction of Bollywood, you see a large emphasis, especially on the younger generations, a large emphasis on the idea of moving towards Western type values, and whether those are like sexual values or relationship values or religious, whatever it is. When you talk to people about this who are sort of caught up in that trap, from a Western perspective, I find it pretty fascinating because I can see exactly where this is going, and it's not good. But they're heading right down that path, and I'm convinced that Bollywood is a creation of the CIA, sort of like Hollywood was. So there's that. That's a whole nother video probably. Okay, and then next bullet here: introduction of new and incompletely understood religious and philosophical systems. So this is the idea of introducing, say, like Buddhism and Hinduism and New Age type religions into the West that have a very heavy focus on Eastern mysticism. And while those things might have their own value and speak to truths themselves, they're not very well understood by Western practitioners for the most part. So people get into these things and they're not gaining the wisdom that somebody who sort of has been immersed in those systems their entire lives would have had. Whereas they've taken away the sort of philosophies and religious traditions that are coherent with the way you grew up, with the culture you lived in, which would be a better guide for you to live your life by. Then the introduction of just very shallow and petty ideologies. You see that all over the place, like critical race theory, just ethnic ideologies, like gender conflict, just shit that does not matter. Little culture war games that people attach themselves to. And I went into that quite a bit in the other video about propaganda. And then you want to focus the public's attention on a false dialectic, which I also went into. So you only have so much attention that you are able to give to any given thing. So if they put your focus in your free time on sort of the left-right dynamic, the black versus white, gay versus straight, Ukraine versus Russia, whatever, then you're not paying attention to what's really going on in the world. You're caught up in something that is meaningless and contrived. Then there's a proliferation of just absolute bullshit beliefs and platitudes. And I just listed a bunch of crap on here. You can read for yourself. But essentially, I'm saying, it's just this wishy-washy, feel-good sort of culture we have that doesn't adhere to reality. You can be anything you want to when you grow up. Well, maybe you are really shitty at math, so you can't really be a successful engineer. Maybe you ought to find what you're good at and sort of focus on that, for instance. Let's see, what else I have on here? Like, everybody's special. Sure, everybody's different. Doesn't mean you're useful. Doesn't mean that you shouldn't try to work on yourself and improve or adhere to some better universal standard. Winning doesn't matter. I mean, it does. The idea that there is no universal truth, that's a big thing. Like, that plays very much into sort of this postmodernism. Perception is a big part of reality, but, it's not all of reality. Reality is still real, and there's some things that are universally true, and you cannot break those laws. So if you think you're not aware that there's universal truths, you're just an easy target. Like, your happiness is all that matters. Like, this is something I hear a lot from people, like getting divorced, like they're just not happy. Well, it's a destructive thing for you and your kids to get divorced. And before you just jump into it, maybe it's better if you sacrifice yourself a bit, your happiness a bit, and try to work things out for the sake of not just destroying things for the sake of avoiding entropy. So, those are just a couple of examples too. And then the creation of social taboos, and this is a big one. And the reason I started talking about this because I was having a conversation yesterday about how political correctness is basically used to make it so that you can't even comprehend what's going on in reality. You can be basically blocked from avenues of thinking, from lines of thought, just from rational, just storylines that are critical for you to navigate the world. And those taboos are listed here. And I can't really talk about them here because there's a reason they're taboos. They exist for the same reason that YouTube exists. They're supposed to control your mind and give you one specific way of thinking and not allow you to venture off into reality. So you can look at those down there. They're obvious, but sometimes just looking at a list is helpful. But taboos and political correctness are incredibly weaponized, and people who are afraid to break sort of politically correct rules, and even people who have just grown up, with beliefs that sound nice. Like, for instance, I used to consider joining the Libertarian Party or whatever, because honestly, that's my belief system personally. I want to be left alone. I don't want to interfere with anybody else's life. But you could also see just how, in reality, as the unbreakable laws of nature sort of take hold, if you don't defend yourself and you just want to be left alone, somebody else is going to come take advantage of you. So there's a lot of things that we have been sort of led to believe in our culture, which are very convenient and a lot of times created by the controlling elite. And you need to think about those things. And if your beliefs don't comport with reality, you've got to make a decision whether you want to live in that fiction or whether you want to move on and be in harmony with the actual universe. And that's why I'm talking about this, because you can't break out of a mental prison that you don't know exists. And it's good to highlight some of the specifics that go into breaking you out of the framework you need to operate in harmony with nature, and breaking that whole framework down and then building up a new one that is your prison. So, I hear people say all the time that, like any kind of belief system is really the same sort of thing, the same sort of prison, but it's not. I mean, you need to live in a building, so you have a house or an apartment. It doesn't have to be a prison that you live in. What you want is a belief system or a framework that you view the world through that meshes with reality, that is true, and what they're giving us is not true. So, once you know the shape of your prison, you're also less likely to walk right back into it. And that's why, also I bring up these specifics. So anyways, this was sort of a little bit of a different video for me, not on anything that I was reading specifically, more of just a thought experiment. But if you liked it, please, again, follow me on Twitter, on Rumble, whatever, Locals, Odyssey, and like, share, whatever. Thanks for watching.